Everybody got their notebooks ready? We're going to start 3D today. There's going to be a ton of information. It'll be fast. It's a big week. We got a whole week. People in the live stream. Brecken, if you're there, let me know if you can hear me. Let's see. What if I rewind the stream? Can I hear myself? Yeah. Double check the output settings. All right, that should be good. TV. All right, here we go. So up until now, we've been working in Unity. We're getting our feet wet there, and we've been bringing in sprites and doing 2D work and making it interactive. The very first week, we started doing some 3D things, and that we brought in a shape from Unity, a three-dimensional shape, a sphere. We got a lot of fundamental vocabulary to establish today. Again, in the program, this class is designed to be taken after ART 184. In ART 184, there's more of a robust introduction to Cinema 4D. Here, some of you have taken it, some of you haven't. This is the fundamental issue, I face teaching these classes, is that they're frequently taken out of order. So it's hard to assume past knowledge about any of the software or knowledge base. And so we're kind of summarizing some things here. If you need some more background on Cinema 4D, where do you go? Well, students usually just Google the problem on YouTube. That's okay. A lot of times if you happen upon the right source, and there are some very good sources on YouTube, the problem is there's also some very bad ones. And so Cinema 4D is the software that we installed that we're going to be using to create 3D content, right? And the 3D content goes into Unity. So what do we make in 3D? We make a mesh, right? And that mesh then goes into Unity, right? So it ends up looking something like this. We have a mesh. We export to Unity. In Cinema 4D, just like in Illustrator, we saved our files so that we have them to go back and change later. When you save a Cinema 4D file, it's a C4D, .c4d file extension. And let's say save. But the .c4d file is not the one that you send over to Unity. This is your personal copy, so that your working files, if you need to go back and make changes later, you can. When we bring things out of Cinema 4D into Unity, we export a .fbx file. This type of file goes directly into Unity, and that allows us to then, in Unity, this is mostly where we'd want to be doing our animating of the mesh, and this is also where in Unity we'd be adding the usual, our animation, our interactivity. And when you deal with a mesh, this is fundamentally different than drawing a sprite, right? In that when you draw a sprite, you have a two-dimensional shape and it has color, right? Because we're essentially just modifying a grid of pixels. In 3D design, there is a separation between the mesh and the material that you wrap around the mesh, right? So we did a little bit of that very first week, where we applied a material to the mesh to change its appearance. And so that is what would be happening here in Unity. Apply material. The metaphor you can use in your brain right now, as you're until you get more comfortable with this, is like this is where you would paint the thing. And so in Cinema 4D, in this class, we're primarily concerned with just making the shape, right? We're just building the mesh. Build the mesh. The color and sort of surface texture, right? The painting metaphor kind of breaks down because it's really more than just paint, right? You can make it look glossy. You can make it look like glass, things that you can't, paint in real life, which is why the metaphor kind of breaks down there. And interactivity and apply materials. Put those all in the same box. That's what I wanted there. Now, so a good plan for what's happening where. So in Cinema 4D, we're just building the mesh, right? That's exactly what's happening there. We're concerned with making a shape that we can bring in to Unity. Unity does not do this, right? That one shape that we brought in, that one is an existing shape, and this is a word you need to memorize. That fundamental shape, Diane, you remember the name for fundamental shapes in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions? It's an old word. Primitive, right? Primitive shapes. They can be 2D or 3D, right? So a 2D primitive would be a circle. A 3D primitive would be a sphere, right? Circle, 2D, sphere, 3D, right? These you can create in Unity, right? Like we did that very first week. If you need a ball, you can just say, hey, give me a new sphere. However, obviously, you're going to want to make shapes in 3-dimensional worlds that aren't just regular primitives, right? So the primitives available in Unity are like, sphere, cube. There's like a capsule. Just basic things. Most of the time, those are not shapes that end up in your final games, right? Sometimes we use them as just like placeholders as we're trying to establish functionality. You guys have seen that now over the course of the first 3 weeks, right? We're trying to, all right, well, let's just prove that this idea works, or like get the workflow happening, and then we can go back and sub out the artwork, right? Which is part of the power of Unity, and that the flexible way it's designed, you can do that sort of thing. Like I'll just build the object and then later go back and just change the mesh component in order to change the appearance of the object, right? And so these shapes are great that they're there for these purposes, but they're not, you can't build a whole game out of spheres and cubes. Or, I mean, you could, but it's just going to be limiting. Like, obviously, you want to be able to exert more visual fidelity over the whole world that you're building here, right? So let's put this in all caps here. Design. There we go. And so this is what we're focusing on this week, just getting up to speed in Cinema 4D and making meshes. And as I was sort of took a turn there a minute ago, some of you are going to be more familiar with this than others. Those of you coming from other schools might have used another program. If you're familiar with another program, every program will export a FBX, right? No matter what it is that you're using. Blender, every program will export an FBX. It's one of the fundamental 3-dimensional mesh formats. And so you can use something else. I'm going to use Cinema 4D because that's what we use in the program here. Some different places to find more resources. The Cinema 4D tutorial site is called Cineversity. Let's get the links together for this. Okay, so, and it's important to realize that Cinema 4D is made by, because you guys didn't sign up for a Cinema 4D license. Technically, you signed up for a, let's do this one, Maxon license, right? Okay, so just so everyone's clear on what they're Googling and understanding how this works, Maxon is the company that makes Cinema 4D, okay? That can be confusing. And the license that you specifically signed up for as a student is called Maxon 1 now. It's just their, fancy, it's not even that fancy, it's just their name for the type of license that you have that gives you access to all the stuff that they make. Because they make stuff other than Cinema 4D. That's the primary thing we're going to use. But Maxon makes Cinema 4D. And so let's go over here. Let's copy this one. So another, we'll do this type of thing here. There we go. See what they're doing with Cineversity there, right? The word cinema plus university, Cineversity. This is their official repository of information. Where else could you go to find out stuff about Cinema 4D? What else, what other learning resources does everybody in the class have access to? Excellent. LinkedIn Learning. There's a search on LinkedIn Learning. The Andy, what is Andy's last name? Needham. There we go. Andy Needham. You can search search LinkedIn Learning by teacher, and all the stuff that Andy Needham almost exclusively does Cinema 4D stuff, and all of his stuff on LinkedIn Learning is great. That's great. Also, on my YouTube channel, right? Obviously, you guys are going there for all of the class streams and everything else. The 185 class is the one that is more concerned with 3D modeling. That's the 3D modeling for animation class. And remember, you can also search the videos on my channel on the homepage, right? You can do that on any YouTube channel. I'm sure you guys know that. And so there's a bunch of Cinema 4D information there. As far as other good Cinema 4D resources, Maxon has several YouTube channels. The one we're going to use here at the beginning that they've really improved recently is this one, Maxon Training. So frankly, it seems like they're kind of transitioning away from Cineversity and into using that as their primary online education location. Let's search for Maxon. There's another one. Yeah. This is more of announcements. So Maxon. Again, these are both YouTube channels, so searchable, just like my YouTube channel. And another great Cinema 4D resource, a gentleman named Chris Schmidt. His YouTube presence is under the name Rocket Lasso. He's great. Put his link there. And then I think he has a separate one for just the live streams. Rocket Lasso Live. And we'll add to that, but that's certainly some of the best ones to be aware of here at the beginning. Let's label this Cinema 4D resources. Did I share this Miro on the homepage yet? Okay. I'll do that in a minute. Okay, so today we're gonna do, this. We're gonna, get our feet wet in Cinema 4D, build some meshes, export them as FBX files, and bring them into Unity. And I'll try to show you a few different techniques for doing this in a way where, where we're going to make 3D stuff, but we're going to rely on our 2D ideas, right? In that, if I told everybody to draw a tree on a piece of paper, you could do that. And what are the easiest ways to sort of take that two-dimensional concept and just easily turn it into a three-dimensional object? We're going to focus on those types of workflows today. Because just like all this stuff, there's many different ways to do these things as far as strategies and techniques. But there's some ones where you get more bang for your buck, right? Everybody heard that phrase before? Right? It just means more value, right? And so a lot of the stuff I'm going to show you today, I always get the spelling wrong. Only one R. Yeah, so this is the thing you'll hear me reference often. I would write this down. You hear a lot of people talk about this. I don't know, it's sort of in the zeitgeist right now. The Pareto principle. And so the Pareto principle here essentially is just a more explicit statement of value. And the numbers that get thrown around, and these are just rough estimates, not some sort of scientifically arrived at values, is that you can get 80% of the results with 20% of the input, right? And so what is the most efficient way to accomplish something? And that's what we're focusing on today. We're not doing an exhaustive introduction to 3D modeling. We're going to try and focus on a few techniques that are going to give you the most bang for your buck, right? So what 20% of 3D modeling can we learn that's going to give us 80% of the possibility space of 3D modeling? Let's put a box around this. Let's make it a colored box. Cool. So you're going to have for this week, you're going to have my information here and watching a series on the Maxon YouTube site where they do a general introduction to Cinema 4D. Theirs is more general about the program in general. Mine is more focused on these techniques that I'm going to communicate to you and the ones that are designed for taking things out of here into Unity, right? Because Cinema 4D does a lot of different things. We're primarily concerned with making a 3D shape. We're not concerned with coloring that 3D shape because that'll be over in Unity. We're not concerned with animating that 3D shape. That'll be over in Unity. We're not concerned with, so that takes away a lot of the things that Cinema 4D does, right? The Cinema 4D does a whole bunch of other things if you're adding color or if you're animating, right? Because then Cinema 4D makes three-dimensional movies, right? But we're not making movies, we're making interactive experiences. So with that in mind, let's look at this. and take something sort of through the workflow here. In Cinema 4D, you come in and you're sort of in this view. And the good news is the shortcuts that you learned for navigating in 3 dimensions in Unity are the same in Cinema 4D, which is why we learned those. And that's great. And so Alt, left mouse button orbits around. Alt, hold down scroll wheel, moves the camera. Alt, right mouse button zooms in and out. Right? So just like Unity 3D navigation, Cinema 4D is the same. So that makes that super handy. The other thing to learn about Cinema 4D is the color coding is meaningful and helpful as far as what types of objects do what. And for right now, we'll be primarily concerned with blue objects. Blue objects are primitives, right? Just like you had primitives in Unity, primitive is not a Unity term. It's a general 3D graphics term. Every program has primitives to use as a starting point and everything like that. Green are generators. These take other objects as input and change them in some way. They do lots of different things. We'll look at all sorts of possibilities for that. What other ones are going to use today? And purple, these are deformers. They change geometry. Because that's what we're doing. We're making a mesh here. And so the mesh, every mesh is made up of points, edges, and polygons. The term for all of those things together is just, you'll hear people refer to it as geometry. That's the geometry of the shape, the mesh you're making. And the mesh most often exists in 3-dimensional space, X, Y, and Z. So we have a list of points for everything. Cool. The other color coding you should know, orange, is not a thing, it is a tool. Okay? Anything that's in orange is a tool, meaning it's not going to be a thing that appears in your scene. It is going to be a tool that you use to, change or manipulate something in the scene. Cool, so let's make something. We're going to start with a basic shape, right? So blue over here, remember blue is what? I'm going to turn this orange. That red color just drives me insane. Just 25500 red. Yeah. Blue is what? Primitives, right? We got primitive shapes. We got 2D primitives right here. Square, 2-dimensional primitive. Cube, 3-dimensional primitive. Every button in Cinema 4D that has this tiny little arrow, right here, that means it's a button and a menu. So if you hold it down, you'll see that there's more options. So for instance, I click and hold this button, I get all of the primitives that I could create here. Right? So I've got cubes, cylinders, discs, cones, whatever. What do we want to make? Let's make a start very simple with a cube first. There we go. All right, class has really started now. Nick has cracked open. Is it the same every time, or do you mix it up?
No, I mix it up, but it's the same brand of Mountain Dew.
Well, I mean, what are you mixing up then?
Meaning, like, the flavors, because Mountain Dew has different flavors. They have orange.
Oh, okay. See, I may be what you would call a Mountain Dew purist. I'm just interested in, like, original formula Mountain Dew. What flavor do we have this morning?
Just the normal one.
Okay, good.
The normal one in can.
Right. I don't drink soda that much anymore, but when I do, it's Mountain Dew. You guys know what I'm referencing there? The Dos Equis commercial. So the cube here. We got a cube. And I can move around in 3D and see this cube. The relative size of something in Cinema 4D. So let's take a tour here. We got all the stuff over here. This is objects. Okay, so these are things that appear in our scene. Things, right? This is in Unity. Since we know Unity, I'll sort of make the equivalent there. The left-hand menu of game objects, this is like that, right? These are things in our scene. Down here, we have attributes. This is like what happens on the right-hand side in Unity, right? Where we have, in Unity, they're called components. Here, they're called attributes. Essentially the same kind of thing. In fact, the coordinates tab here is exactly the same as the transform. It's called transform. Again, transform is not a software word. It's just the word for a position in space. And so the attributes here have different tabs. So you can look at one tab at a time, or you can shift click and look at multiple tabs at the same time and sort of scroll through the windows here. We're primarily concerned with two tabs most of the time. The coordinates, which is like where is this thing, right? And then we're also concerned with the object tab, because that allows you to see what are the options for the cube, right? And so here you can see we've got size and segments. We'll get to segments in a second. So in size, I can dial this up and down to different sizes. And then let's learn two shortcuts here. By default, in Cinema 4D, we don't see the underlying structure of the mesh, right? The geometry, the other word that goes along with that is topology. So this is an important word, equals how the geometry is placed on the surface of the object. In order to talk about topology, we need to be able to see it. And by default, we don't see it. I think I'll probably give you guys a new default file, but we won't do that today, maybe on Wednesday. One of your first shortcuts, and something to learn that in Cinema, we have some shortcuts that are two keys. You do not press them together. You press one, then the other, okay? And so NB is the sequence of keys that you press to reveal the geometry. So check this out. What happens when I press NB? Press NB, and I need to not be in the menu here. There we go. N. So this is actually what's happening. N brings up the display shortcuts, and so you can see them right there. And then B allows me to see the lines. Now it's pretty subtle here. You know what? We're not going to make a cube. We're going to make a sphere, because that'll be better for what I'm trying to show you, right? So here's NA turns this off, and essentially, if you don't memorize that one, that's fine. Just memorize NB, because you want to see this. This reveals how the polygons are laid out across the surface of the object, the topology of the object. To demonstrate this here, I'm going to make a second one by control dragging, right? So that's the copy drag in Cinema 4D. I hold down control, and I just drag the object over here. That makes a copy of it, rather than, you can also just Control C, Control V, or Control D to make a copy. But I'm going to come over here and just change this, and come over here and change it again to something else. There we go. And here, you see I have 3 spheres, right? But the topology of each one is different. The way the polygons are laid out on the surface. If I were to render this, which again, we don't need to worry about, because we don't really care how it's rendered in Cinema 4D. We just care about making the shape and bringing it into Unity, right? But is this clear to everybody here, this idea of topology? These three spheres are the same, but they have different topology. The way the polygons are laid out on the surface is not the same. Okay, when we talk about topology, we need to learn a few names for polygons. The best kind of polygon is a quad. It has 4 sides. The other one is a triangle. Also not bad. A triangle obviously has 3 sides. Anything bigger than 4 is what's referred to as an n-gon. Okay? In general, undesirable. Okay? Where we may not want quite as much of those. These are general guidelines. Okay? More, I just want you to learn the terminology. Quad has 4, triangle has 3, and n-gon, right? Quad and triangle are pretty self-explanatory. Everyone's got that in their wheelhouse at this point. But n-gon, right? For those of the mathier people out there, right, you usually use n to describe an unknown amount of something, right? And so an n-gon is a unspecified number of sides of a polygon. And so if you look at these, we have pretty much triangles, quads, triangles over here, right? Everything's broken down into that over these 3 types of topology. Cool. I'm going to make that cube. And so now with the cube, you can see the cube has very simple topology at the beginning. It has 1 polygon on each side of the cube for a total of 6 polygons. The segments over here on the cube object tab, this controls how many polygons you want there to be on each side of the cube. Why would I want more polygons on this cube? It has to do when we go to make the shapes. The shapes with more polygons are going to be more easily deformable. I'll turn this back down. Let's get something through the workflow here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a purple object. The purple objects here, what was the name for purple objects? Deformers, right? So they change geometry, and you need to group a deformer with a mesh or primitive. Fortunately, the shortcut for grouping in Cinema 4D is pretty easy. Alt G for group. So I'm going to click and hold this, and the deformer I'm interested in here is bevel. Okay, what is bevel going to do? Round the corners of this cube. We want rounded corners. Okay, this will be a guiding principle for all of our forays into 3D modeling here, is that you want to have a rounded corner to make the object look more, I'm not going to say realistic, but to make it interact with the light better, right? Without doing this, you end up with what's called sort of that low poly look, which some of you may have played games that have that kind of look or seen art that has that kind of look. And it's kind of old or retro because in the past, it was harder to make this many polygons or render this many polygons. So we want rounded corners. So I'm going to click and hold. Down at the bottom here is bevel. Nothing happens. Why does nothing happen? Because these two objects are not grouped together. And so I select both of them, and I press Alt G. Boom. What happened there? Immediately, you see that I get more geometry on the corners the edges of the object. Yes? And, man, what happened to all my stuff over here? Now it's all collapsed into this object, which is a null. A null is just a axis point. And so if we unfurl here, right, we've done this in Unity where we just use a blank game object, right, in order to group things together. Same thing here, except the blank game object in Cinema 4D is called a null, but conceptually exactly the same thing. And usually you don't want to leave things labeled null, you want to label them. And so I'll call this beveled cube. There we go. And now if I select the bevel, I can come in and, again, it has its own attributes for things that I can adjust. And so what do I want to adjust here? The main ones here are going to be the offset and the subdivision. And so the offset is how much rounding is happening on the corners. You see that by default, it doesn't look that rounded. It's sort of like a straight 45-degree, or 45? Yeah, I guess depending on what angle you were looking at. 45-degree angle on the edge. That can be adjusted by the subdivision, right? So by adding more topology, we can round something. This is another guiding principle. Single polygon cannot be bent. In order to create curvature, we need to subdivide to create curvature. This is why we do not have rounded corners yet, because there's no subdivisions on the corner. If we come back here and put the subdivisions at something like 2, boom, boom, ta-da! Rounded corners, right? Now there's more topology to work with, so the program can make a rounded corner. And so now the offset is sort of the size of that rounding, and the subdivision would be the smoothness. Now, right now, always set the subdivision to 2, right? In general, less polygons is better than more polygons, right? The more polygons you have, the more math the computer needs to do in order to show you the stuff. Now, don't be too obsessed with this at the beginning. Be more concerned with making your shapes, because the computer is fast enough to handle, a pretty good amount of polygons. But in general, as a guiding principle going forward, when it's easy to be more efficient, you should definitely be more efficient as far as, can I represent the shape with less polygons? That's ultimately going to be faster. Why do we care about the speed? What type of rendering do we do in this class? Real time, right? It's a video game. It needs to render really fast. Whereas if you're just making a movie in Cinema 4D, the computer has a long time. It can take a really long time to think about each frame and draw it out, right? Here, we have a different paradigm, and it needs to be more efficient. So some of the things that you could get away with before, you may not be able to get away with now, but for the most part, just keep that in mind. Let's put those on our board, right? This is how I think about this stuff, is that I come up with these guiding, from experience, I come up with guiding principles, and we'll call these first principles. You'll find a lot of writing about this in the zeitgeist recently, first principles thinking. And first principles for 3D modeling. I try to use those principles as my decision-making framework for doing things. And so here is that, what do we want to have? We want to have rounded corners so that all of the models interact with light in a good way. Rounded corners create higher fidelity. What does the word fidelity mean? looks better. Looks good, right? So higher fidelity would be, you hear this word with visuals and sound, high fidelity sound. Rounded corners create higher fidelity. A single polygon cannot be bent, right? Subdivide to create curvature. There we go. We'll add to this as we go along, but this is certainly a good start. These are special principles that should guide all of our thinking, so they deserve a colored box. Blue. I should be consistent with that on all the other ones. There we go. Cool. Okay, so I've got something here, and this is something I want to bring into Unity, because the Unity default cube does not have rounded corners. This one now has rounded corners. Let's make it a little bit different, more of a rectangle. And so the bevel is where I control the rounding. I can still go back to the cube and change the size of it. So we'll make it something like this, like a platform with rounded corners. So this is the power of Cinema 4D. These two things are separate objects, the bevel deformer and the, there we go, the bevel deformer and the cube, right? They're separate objects, and they each have their own parameters, and I can adjust those parameters while they both calculate together because they're grouped together in a null. This kind of workflow is non-destructive, meaning that at any time I can go back and adjust these parameters to change the result. To make the rounding maybe a little sharper, thereby decreasing the offset. There we go, I have a platform that looks good. Cool, all right, and so we're gonna use this in our first 3D adventure in Unity. And so we need to get it out of, as far as we're concerned, this is good, right? We don't want to worry about the color. We don't need to worry about the animation of this because all that's going to happen over in Unity. We're just using Cinema 4D here to make a basic shape. Everybody with me? Cool. All right, so let's reference our thing here. And so in Cinema 4D, we build the mesh. Before we do anything else, we should probably save the C4D file in case we need to come back and make any adjustments, right? Because the point I want to make here is that here, when we save it, it'll be saved in this instance as a cube, not a voob, a cube with a bevel, right? And that's non-destructive. And when we open the C4D file again, we can go back and make changes to it. Very flexible. When we export it as an FBX, all of those parameters will go away. It'll now become a raw mesh, meaning it'll just be a pile of points, edges, and polygons. None of that those nice sliders to adjust it will be there anymore. It is now just a raw mesh. Okay? This is very similar to the way Illustrator works, right? When you're in Illustrator, you're making vectors, right? And the vectors are nice curves. You can adjust the Bezier handles. It's great, right? But then when you export out of Illustrator to a PNG, those curves go away and you rasterize the image. And it becomes just a bunch of pixels. The equivalent is happening here in 3D, where we export the FBX and it becomes a mesh, right? And so you can think of a mesh as the equivalent of a pile of pixels in the workflow here. Okay? So let's save this. Let's come back to here, and I'll go to File, Save Project As. In my data drive, 200. This is, we'll call this cube platform. Save. Cool. Now, like I said, that's our version to go back and adjust later if we need to. We need to export one for Unity. And so in order to do that, we need to take 2 steps here. Let's write those down in our interface. Right, so export FBX. This is actually a little bit more complex of a thing. And so we want to I'm working at the maximum size there. Okay. We need to connect objects is going to be the command in Cinema 4D that'll sort of collapse it down into a mesh. And then we'll need to use the export menu. And then critically, in the export menu, we need to turn off lights and cameras. Once you do this the first time on your home computer, it'll stick, and then you don't need to worry about it. But this is going to be our beginning export protocol here. Connect objects, export menu, turn off lights and menus. Let's learn the most important Cinema 4D shortcut, Shift-C. If you don't remember anything else from today, remember Shift-C. Shift-C allows you to search for anything in Cinema. So for instance, I know, as long as you know the name of the thing you're looking for, then you're pretty good. I can connect objects here, Shift-C, and search for anything. So here, I'm going to, all right, I know Casey said something about connecting objects. I'm going to go Shift-C. I get this search field. It can say connect objects. There we go. And it's orange, so that means it's a what? Tool, exactly. And so Shift-C, connect objects. There we go. I can double click on it and check out what it did. It gave me a new object here. And so all my old stuff is still here. The new object is there. I can press E to move it around, right? We'll get to that in a second. And I'll move it here. So it duplicated it, but it duplicated it. It doesn't look the same here. Where this is the thing we just made, this is the stuff we had before. This icon right here, this is the icon for a mesh. Okay? Remember how I said we'll take whatever we did that was all fancy and procedural, and we'll collapse it down into just a raw mesh, just a bunch of locations in three-dimensional space? Then that's what this is. Okay? We've essentially converted it into a mesh. Why do we want to do this? That seems dumb. Like here I have all these great sliders that I could adjust. I would certainly want to adjust those later, right? It's because none of this stuff would transfer over to Unity. There's no way to do it in that. Unity is just looking for a mesh that's going to come in to Unity there. So now we've got this cube. I'm going to change the name of it to beveled cube mesh so that I'm clear on what I'm doing. And this is the thing that I'll send over to Unity. And so up here in this right-hand menu, there's File, and you can say Export Selected Object As. So we just have selected object. Right click, export selected object as file, export selected object as, what format do we want here? FBX. There we go. I get a dialog box here. And I remember Casey said something. We'd turn off something here. Turn off what?
Lights.
Yes, lights and cameras. Lights and cameras, right? But you're like, I haven't made a camera. There's sort of a default camera in here, and we don't want to have that get exported because it just becomes a pain in the butt later when you bring it into Unity. You end up with too many cameras. So we want to turn those off. And once you click them off, then when you do this next time, they should just be off, I believe. And so I can say OK. And put this here in beveled cube. We'll try to spell cube correctly. Mesh. And I'll export that. Excellent. That should be pretty fast. There's really nothing fancy happening here. Let's get to Unity here. And let's make a new project so we get more practice with that. I'm going to say new. And we'll call this 3D class examples. And we'll put it in the correct folder. And when presented with these options, which one do I want? Yes, everyone has this ingrained in their brain at this point, right? We want universal render pipeline. Like I said, there's new versions that say universal 2D, universal 3D. Doesn't matter so much. Pick universal 3D for today's work. But as long as it says universal, that's what we mostly care about. And we'll create this. And wait a second. Everything's still good on the live stream. Good. Okay, Unity's going to take a second to put that project together. Remember that was not good on the other version. We'll give it a second. While that's doing that, let's just do a few other tools in Cinema 4D. Right, so we talked about primitives. We'll use generators here in a little bit. And we used one deformer, probably the most important one for us, the bevel deformer. Allows us to round corners on something, right? Over here is important to understand Cinema 4D operates in a combination of two things. You have up here, this is called a mode, which answers the question, what? What do I want to manipulate? Do I want to manipulate a point, an edge, a polygon, or an object, or an anchor point, right? So these are point, edge, polygon, object, anchor point. Those are the ones we're primarily concerned with. here at the beginning. And so you have what do you want to do? And then over here, you have the tool. What do you want to do with it, right? And so the most important tools here at the beginning are going to be move, rotate, scale. So allow me to demonstrate here. I'm going to turn off the other cube. So I have this mesh right here. And so this is object mode, okay? And so when I have the E, R, and T, right? So E, move, R, rotate, T, scale. E, move, R, rotate, T, scale. Super important to have those memorized, probably written down in the notes. The move here allows me to move the entire object. I can move it in one axis at a time. I definitely want to move in one axis at a time. I don't want to click over here and move in 3 axes at a time, because that makes it really difficult to move things around. I can rotate. I'm rotating the whole object. I can scale. I'm scaling the whole object, right? So move, scale, and rotate an object. I'm going to switch to polygon mode. Now I can select a polygon, just one polygon, the top face here, and I could move this polygon. See how this is different than moving the entire object? I'm just moving one face of it, one polygon. I could rotate that face. You see this results in some pretty weird looking geometry immediately. A lot of you reacted, Nick, you were incredulous the instant I did that. That's a good instinct, right? Because you would not want to export this kind of mesh, because that looks like a big problem, right? So good, you have good instincts there as far as like what looks good and what doesn't. And then T to scale. You can scale individual polygons. You're seeing where this is going. I could switch to edge mode, and now I could move just a single edge. If I press E, I moved one edge. You see how that changes the shape. I could rotate this edge. I could scale this edge, right, as a way to manipulate the object shape. And then point. Moving a point makes sense. If I press E, I can move a single point to manipulate the shape. Rotating a point doesn't really do anything. It's like an infinitely small point in space. And also scaling a point doesn't really do anything. Okay. And I'm just Control-Zing back to the original shape there. But see how these things work in tandem? You have, you could move any of these 3 things. You could rotate any of these 3 things, so on and so forth. Right? So a combination of modes and tools there. Let's see, did Unity actually make a... Oh, it made a file. Oh. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Okay, cool. All right. So in the newer version, when you make the 3D sample, 3D scene, I believe there's a checkbox that says, do you want the sample scene? And so if so, I'll leave it and we'll build things in the sample scene today. But if you don't have the sample scene, that's fine, as long as it's URP. And this will give us some things to work with here as well. Cool. And so now I'm going to make a new folder in my quest to be more organized. Folder, I'm going to call this Farina. And then a lot of times if you use a template when you're starting in Unity, in their effort to be organized, it has different things in it. However, I find it useful to put all of my stuff in my own folder, top-level folder, so that the things that I've done are separate from what's in the default template, right? So that I can easily collect those things later if I need to. Anyways, here's my folder. Now I'll make a new folder. In that folder called Farina Mesh, right? Because that's what we made in Sim4D. We made a mesh And now we want to bring that in here. Bringing in the mesh. I believe this works now this semester. Didn't I do this previously? Is that now I can go to the mesh that I've made. And which one do I want to bring in? The C4D file or the FBX file? FBX, right? In Windows, the C4D file will look like, you know, the thing. The FBX will probably just be a generic icon. And so here, I can just drag this in. Boom. Comes in as beveled cube mesh. Excellent. And so now, just like my two-dimensional graphics, I can just drag this thing into here, into my 3D world. These spheres that are appearing here, those are light probes. We don't need to see those right now. Let's look here. Icons. Let's search for light. There we go. I'm going to turn off light probe group in the menu here, in the scene view, because it's just further complicating things. In fact, what if we turned off 3D icons? That's better. Okay, cool. And so here, boom, I've got a mesh in my scene here. This scene, the sample scene already has some lights and everything set up, which we need to do. And you see that it's got everything else going forward here. You see I can, again, move, scale, and rotate this just like in Cinema. And now I can worry about things like animation and materials. So often people immediately want to be able to control the color, and so let's do that. We did this the very first week, but let's do it again. We'll create a new folder. We'll call it Farina Materials. I'll double click, I'll right click, and I'll say, you can right click or you can just press this one to create an asset, and you can go to material. You got to name your material, so we'll call this platform color. And I'll drag it onto the platform. There it goes. And the material, I can apply the same material to multiple objects. So check this out. If I go back to mesh here and I drag in another one over here somewhere, if I apply the same material to it, go back to materials and drag the material onto it there. If I apply the same material to multiple objects, they're both referencing the same material asset. And so if this thing changes, everything that this is applied to changes. This is just like Cinema. And so in this case, I can come in here and change the color of this thing to something like that. And both things change because they both have the same material applied. Does that make sense for everybody? Cool. Now, let's, like I said, it's more than just color. We can have how metallic does the surface look. That's the metallic thing here. The smoothness. And so this would be a smooth metal. You see that it starts to look very metallic. And this would be a dull metal. This would be a dull plastic. If I had the metal the whole way down and turn up the smoothness, this would be more like a smooth plastic. In general, turning these things the whole way up and down tends to not look that great. And we'll get to some other stuff here a little bit later on, but this gives us a cool starting point. Let's hit play and see what happens with these. I think by default they'll just stay there. Cool. All right, I think we have time. Let's lay out some things we could do here. We'll call this strategies 3D creation. This is really more an implementation, so we'll call it a tactic. Let's bring this over here. Essentially, these, like I said, are being guided by that Pareto principle. What things can we do to get a lot of bang for our buck? So, one of them here is a lot of students in the class don't know anything about 3D modeling. We're trying to catch you up here. But how do I leverage my 2D skills to make a 3D thing, right? I can draw something. I wish it was 3D. And we can do this by extruding vectors. Let's look at what that means. I'm going to make Control N. I'm going to get just a shape. We'll use, these are two-dimensional primitives. I'll use the circle first, right? So here's a circle. It's a two-dimensional shape. Everybody understands that. I'm going to extrude it by clicking and holding here and grabbing the extrude. And in this case, right, with the green one, we need to have this be a child of this. And so I can click and hold, drag, and when the arrow points down, I'll let go, watch what happens. And it extrudes that two-dimensional shape into 3 dimensions. And so if I click the extrude and go to offset, right, this is essentially like a Play-Doh paradigm here, right? We have some sort of shape, and we just pull that shape into a 3-dimensional mesh, right? This is extruding the object. However, you're like, okay, that's great if you want to extrude a circle, but you know, I want to do some things that are not these shapes. You can leverage your skills from Illustrator in Cinema 4D. And so I'm going to make a new, we'll go to film and video settings, and that's all fine. Illustrator is not responding. It's responding slowly. There we go. Cool. All right, so making some sort of more complex shape here, right? All of your Illustrator drawing skills are applicable. I'm going to use the Shape Builder tool, which is one of the ones we use in the robot assignment in So let's make a platform that looks a little bit more interesting in some sort of non-traditional shape. And so I'm going to grab the pen tool, I guess, and make some sort of like trapezoidal sort of shape. Something like this, that would be a bit irregular. And come back to the anchor point tool, A. You can grab the corners of these things to round the anchor points. Got to make sure I have all of them. And then if I pressed A for anchor point, do I have caps lock on? There we go, off. Round this a little bit. I want a thicker border to this, so under the stroke, I'll make that much bigger, kind of like that. Cool. And hit V for, well no, A for anchor point tool. And grab, let's go with this. So making a shape here that's not available in the primitives, has this much thicker border. How can I drew a shape here, how can I turn this into a three-dimensional thing? I'm going to save this first, save as an Illustrator file on my computer. And what we can do here is Cinema 4D plays very nice with Illustrator. And so I can grab the Illustrator file here, and I can just drag it into Cinema. It'll ask me scale, create vector object. I'll just say OK. And here we have the Illustrator example. And it's turned this into an object that has options here. So for instance, things could be offset and extruded. And so now, for instance, the scale is a little wacky here. Let's say 0.1, maybe a little bit bigger, 0.3. You see we get two separate things in order to create this shape. And so the spread here is sort of how far away they are from one another. And the offset would be how far away they are from the anchor point. We want to leave that at 0 for now. But the extrude depth, let's go ahead and leave that maybe at 0.4. But you see how this opens up a whole world of stuff here. We can just bring in something that we sketched in Illustrator and just immediately, within a few clicks here, start turning it into some sort of three-dimensional shape. So let's say 1. There we go. What was one of our other guiding principles? What did we want to have? Our models wanted to have what? What do we want to do to the corners? Yeah, round the corners. We did that with the bevel before. Unfortunately, there's different techniques for rounding corners. It's hard to do something that's just one. I can press NB so I can see the polygons here. And under caps, you see that I have a bevel. And so this allows me to round the size of the different objects. And so we can round the corner on that white one. The black one is a little bit different here. So let's say well, we'll leave it as is for now. We got a little bit of rounding there. Let's leave it as is. It'd be easier to get a little bit more control here. And so the main thing that we want to do is under object is select the extrude depth so that we can see that the objects have become 3D. And it'd be great to just sort of manipulate them independently. And so another super important Cinema 4D shortcut is just C, which is convert the object. So watch what happens when I press C on this Illustrator object. Press C. It turns into a null, and I have some different things in here. And so now I have two things. I have the stroke and the fill. And so now I can manipulate these things independently, which is super, super handy. So, for instance, our stroke here, we have a rectangle that's essentially going around the edge. We could round the edge of that. So I selected the stroke rectangle. Let's say that's 0.2, something like that. We could adjust the height and width. So the scale is off here, right? If I make a tiny change, it's like a huge one here. And so if you hold down, what is it, Control? If you hold down Alt when you drag on the parameters, it will make very small incremental changes, which is working for us here. And so there we go. I can manipulate that. I have the rectangle selected there. Let's select the stroke and move that. There we go. Cool. So, objects in 2D that can come in, we'll do some more of this, but now I have like a much more interesting shape, right? That's got like this cool rounded edge that I could use as a platform in 3D. Let's follow the rest of the workflow. So, do I want to export this, or what do I want to do? What did I do to the cube? Connect objects, same thing. So here, I'm going to Shift-C, connect objects. That gives me everything mushed down into the mesh, just like we talked about. And then this, let's rename it. This is platform. We'll call it, let's be more specific, because we might have many platforms. So we'll call it trapezoid platform. And we will export that as an FBX. Lights and camera are off. We can save it here. Bring it back over here. And go to my mesh folder. Same thing. We're going to bring in trapezoid platform. Cool. I can bring this up here. The scale is strange, right? So our scale was a problem here coming out of Illustrator. We'll have to see what some different options are. We can adjust it here in Unity. And so if I select the mesh itself that came in, one of the main things over here is the scale factor. Okay, this will change the default size. And so this is something we want to put in our list of things to keep in mind here. So when we export the FBX into Unity, we come in. We may need to adjust. Select the mesh asset and adjust scale. right? So the asset is down here. You may be saying, like, why do it that way? Why not just come up here and press the scale key and scale this thing up? Why not do it this way? Because watch what happens when I scale this up. Over here, now the scale of this object is 22. And that may not seem like that much of a problem. However, if this is going to be the new like standard size of this platform in my project, then I'm going to need to remember that every time I scale this. Like, oh yeah, that was 22. So if I want to make a bigger one, it has to be 24 or 40, 44, so on and so forth. If we just scale the default size, then we can keep the default for the other things at 1. We did this with the sprites as well. And so here, under trapezoid, not the object, the asset, I can come into model and scale it by a factor of, let's say, 8. And I'll have to hit return, and if you click, it'll say, do you want to apply? Yes. So there, that's close, maybe even a little bit more. Let's say 20. I'll click apply. There we go. And so now, this is the new default size for the trapezoid. If I click on it, the scale is 1, not 22, because I changed the underlying import size of the mesh, which is super important. So now I can manipulate this, move it around, just like I would in Cinema 4D. I have this much more interesting shape. If we look over here under materials, we have a material that we can apply to it. So we could apply the same material, or we could make another one. We'll call this shiny purple. And so we'll select purple. We'll adjust the metallicness and smoothness of it and throw that on here. Now, like I said, the primary thing that comes over from Cinema 4D is the shape, okay? Not the colors, right? Because you're saying like, well, I had the white and black from Illustrator here. Why don't I have the white and black over there in it? A bunch of things. We'll do another example like this on Wednesday, but we just have the basic idea here, right? So anything that you could draw in Illustrator, you could easily extrude into any sort of shape here that would work like this. Make sense? All right, so that's one possible idea, is like we come in from Illustrator, we extrude vectors in order to create some sort of shape. We could combine shapes using a volume. Let's do that. So I'll make another one here, Control N for a new blank one. We'll just make some sort of very simple tree shape here. So for instance, I could come in here with a cylinder and, well, let's do it with a cone. I'm going to come in here with a cone. You'll see that the cone options are different than the options for the cube or the sphere, because it's a different kind of thing. And if I grab the yellow parameters here, I can move this and manipulate it. I could control drag it over here and rotate it and scale it down, make a little bit of a branch or something. And then I could control drag that over to the other side, make another branch coming off the other side, rotate, give it a little bit different of an angle. Notice how I'm moving only in one dimension at a time. There we go. Make this shorter, grab that yellow dot there, something like that. I'll make a sphere, grab this for a bigger top part of the tree, bring this over, bring this down, T. Let's see. Trying to move in one direction at a time, sort of line things up. Once I have it in place, I can sort of create some irregular shapes by just control dragging, T, E, control drag, T. There we go. Create some more of like a tree volume, like this is where some of the leaves are. You could do the same thing over here. So I could manipulate this. Let's make it bigger. Control drag T for scale. Bring this over. Just sort of make it a little bit different. Control drag over here. T. Bring this down. E. This way. I have all the stuff I did over here for these. I can control drag multiple things at the same time. Bring them over. Put on this tree branch over here. Move some of these around. Right, so I'm making something by combining primitives. This isn't crazy, right? But also it doesn't look spectacular in that I can clearly tell that that's what's going on, right? I've got a bunch of shapes that are just kind of duplicated, and it's not very, nothing is mushed together, right? It's clearly a bunch of individual components, right? And so we can mush things together with a volume. Two objects. So right here, I'll show you where they are, but even if you don't remember, you can just use Shift-C to find them. I'm going to make two things. A volume builder and a volume mesher. And so we need to put things together in order to mush them together. I'm going to turn off all the leaves so we can see how this works with the tree trunk parts. So I'm going to take all three of these and shift-click, drag them into the builder. Watch what happens. Boom. Starts to look like Minecraft. The word for this is voxel, right? A voxel is a 3D pixel, right? Instead of a two-dimensional grid, we have a three-dimensional grid, right? Is anybody into Minecraft or used to be into Minecraft? Yeah. So we have a two-dimensional grid here. In the volume builder, the most important parameter here is voxel size. And so this is how big are the blocks. You want to be careful here and not go too small, because a small block means that there'd be many, many, many more blocks for things. I'm going to say 5. There we go. And this is fine, but if you render, there's nothing there yet. And so I need to build a mesh, right? Again, meshes are what we're caring about here. We need to get volumes into meshes. And there we go. I'm going to press NB. And now you see that it's taken the shapes that I have and actually like fused them together into something that looks much more like a continuous piece of tree trunk as opposed to what I had before, right? This and this. Now I don't want to mush the tree parts into the trunk parts, the leaf parts, right? And so I'm going to create a separate one for that. Separate mesher, a separate builder. I'll put the mesher in the builder, and I'll grab all my other parts and dump those in the mesher. I'll turn them all back on. And, oops, I did this backwards. You have to put all the objects in the builder, and then the builder in the mesher. There we go. So now, this is better. The nice thing about this is all these things are still editable, and so I can just change the underlying size of it here in order to make my tree sizes a little bit more irregular. Just going to move this back in, kind of like this, to create more of an irregular tree size. You can see it mushed together the things over there. And so here, I was able to create something by creating a hierarchy in order to make something where things are actually mushed together here. Everybody with me so far? Right? So you see how this looks different than this, right? Where everything is just a totally distinct object and the borders between the objects would not be continuous. Whereas we turn these other objects on and render, now things are continuous here. For all the spheres, I'm going to come in, I want them to be a little bit rounder, so I'm going to turn up the segments on them so they'll become much more spherical. And now if I were to look at it by Control R, I want another small branch down here. And so again, everything is separate and changeable. So I can just Control drag to create another branch, rotate it, move it to wherever I would want. And you see all of the other stuff is evaluating on top of that. I could go in and change the underlying size of the main trunk by adjusting this. And so I'm able to mush these shapes together into this type of thing. I'm going to save this one, File, Save Project As, Tree, Example. And here, a lot of Cinema 4D is like this, where we need to build this hierarchy in order to use the objects. There's one more object here that's going to be used, and that is remesh. What does remesh do? It fixes topology. So this is a great object, new one, and it really does a lot to clean things up. Check this out. I'm going to click here and grab remesh, and this one here, this is my leaves mesh. I'm going to dump that into remesh to create a deeper hierarchy, right? So you see that now it's remesh inside of leaves, inside of the builder. Look what happened there. What changed in it? The topology, right? Here's what we had before. Here's what we have after. If you're someone who just appreciates order over chaos, right? This should appeal to you. This versus this. What kind of polygons do we have now? What's that? They have 4 sides.
Square, cube,
Quad, there you go, right? And the remesh object has one thing that you can care about, mesh density, right? Because if we have a choice between more polygons and less polygons, which one do we want? Less, right? We want it to be more efficient. And so by turning down the mesh density, you can have it re-topologize this with less polygons. Now, at some point, it'll get so low that it'll like compromise the shape of the object, but you can dial it in. So you have a very, like, you see that this looks okay for the top, but this gets a little too blocky down here. So I'll turn it up a little bit to a point where the bottom ones look okay. Sure, about right there. I can do the same thing for the bottom one. And so again, I'll grab the remesh object. I forgot where Casey got that. Shift-C, remesh, enter. There it is. Now I just need to drag it into there. It remeshes. Looks a little heavy. A lot of polygons. I'll select remesh and dial down the topology of it. Cool. So I have a fairly clean tree here. Save again. And now we need to do the connect objects and spit it out of here. In this case, though, when I bring it into the game, with the platform, we had the situation where I could only apply a material and the material went to the whole thing, right? I couldn't make the edge different than the center. In order to do that, I want to make sure that this is separate. And so I am going to come over here, and with this one is the trunk. I'm going to rename it trunk. This one is the leaves. I'll rename it leaves. And then I'll do a connect objects on each of them individually. Check this out. So trunk, I'll Shift-C connect objects. That gives me trunk mesh. And then on leaves, I'll Shift-C connect objects, and that gives me leaves. And so now I have two individual meshes. This will allow me to texture these separately in Unity. So I'll grab both of them. I'll group them together just for the sake of organization. So Alt-G. This is the whole tree. There we go. And now this will be the thing that I export. And so let's go ahead and File, Export selected object as FBX. No camera, no lights. It already says tree. Great. Come back over here. Here. Under mesh, let's bring in our tree. We can bring this up here. There we go. We see that the scale, we don't need to adjust the scale. The scale seems okay for now. I'm going to move some of these platforms out of the way for right now. Cool. And so if we look at the tree mesh up here, we have two separate objects, leaves and trunk. And so leaves here has its own mesh that gets its own material. And so, for instance, on the leaves, I'll just use my pre-made green, put that on there. And now I'll need to make a new material. We'll call this trunk brown. And let's grab a brown of some kind. There we go. And I don't want it to be shiny. Well, I'll have it be kind of like this. There we go. I think that'll go with it. And so now I'll drag this onto the trunk. And so that gives me a tree. Control D. Multiple trees. So there's a lot that can be done with this workflow. And we'll call this workflow we'll call this extrusion modeling. That's the one from Illustrator. We'll call this one volume. Oops. Volume And that's the one where we're combining shapes there to create different things. Let's amend our protocol over here. So connect objects. We have Shift-C to connect the objects into a single mesh. However, connect a group and to maintain a separate hierarchy. This is important for both materials and animation. So seeing the volume modeling here, does this give you guys some ideas? Diana, what does it give you an idea about? What could you see making with this type of thing?
Maybe like a little
Playground?
playground.
A slide? Okay. So something like that. Or if we had like a cylinder. When I have a repeated pattern like that, you know, like the ladder on the slide, I'm going to go ahead. I got this cylinder. I'm going to make another cylinder. I'm going to switch the direction of it. Let's have it point in the X direction and bring it way down. Cool. Now, we'll call this frame. We'll call this rung, just to keep things easier to handle. And then I'll control drag this one over here. Right? That makes it easy to do that. And I'll grab this one. I can control drag, holding down control, just dragging it up directly in that direction. This gives me this sort of ladder look. And then how would I combine these into one thing? Well, that groups them. Grouping them doesn't fuse the geometry together, right? Like this, in this case, this might look okay. Let's use the volume workflow to move it together. And so here, let's go ahead and, oh yeah, I know how we can do this. This is a super good idea, Diana. Here we go. Right, so we'll combine both techniques. Perfect. I'm going to volume model this. So I'll get volume builder and volume mesher and put all the objects in the builder. There we go. It's voxelized. It looks really pixelated, right? And so when that happens, the pixels, the voxel size needs to come down. Let's try 5. Let's try 3. There we go. And then I put the builder inside the mesher. There we go. Now you see that this is all fused into one object. Does the difference there make sense to everybody? How this is different? This will become one continuous mesh, right? As opposed to if you were to bring it out like this, see how none of these things are actually connected. They're all just separate objects. Whereas the volume builder fuses them together into a distinct mesh. And to clean up the mesh even further, we can feed it into the remesh. And so I can dump this in there. And that makes a very clean ladder for me. Okay, so I need a slide. What do we think over here? The tube? I was thinking more of like the standard sort of open top slide, not like a tube. Those would work if we're doing that type of thing. There's different ways to make this shape in Cinema 4D, but just knowing what we know now. Again, like I said, I'm interested in bang for your buck techniques here, right? Well, I could draw a slide in Illustrator, right? Let's do it. So if I come in here and make an Illustrator shape real quick with the pen tool, right? The pen tool is going to make this very easy. I'm going to click and click and drag, click and drag, and click. Go to A for anchor point tool. I don't need any fill on this, so I'm going to turn that off. And now I can grab this and sort of smooth it out. Maybe add another point right there. Cool. Now, since this is just a path here, first of all, let's go ahead and I don't know why this keeps loading in this weird view workspace. There we go. I want to round the corners on this. There we go. And dial up the thickness, kind of like that. There we go. And then I want this to be a shape, not a path. And so I'm going to grab this and click outline stroke. Makes it a shape, right? So that we have inner and outer. Great. Let's go ahead and, so see what I'm doing here? I'm drawing the profile of the slide. We're going to dump it into Cinema 4D and extrude it out into the slide shape. And so here we are going to save as, slide profile. Okay. And come back here. And we can bring this in. There we go. Select this, and we can say extrude depth extrudes this out for us. And then under caps, let's round the corners. Yeah, that's not going well. Let's not do that. We'll say, don't do that. And so I'm going to Control C and then come back to my other one here. When you bring in an Illustrator file, it puts it in a new file. The files are up here under tabs. And so I can just come over here and just Control V, and you see that pastes the slide into here. And so I can manipulate the slide here, hit T, needs to be way bigger, whoops. I'm going to hit C on the slide, T, bring this up. R, let's rotate it around, hold down Shift. If I hold down Shift, it'll lock to 90 degrees. E, bring it up. T, let's get it about the right size. E, move it over, kind of like this. T, probably needs to come down a little bit. T. Okay, we got the basic shape here. The edges are like, this doesn't really look like it, vibes with the other part as far as the, shape of the whole thing. So again, the powerful thing in Cinema 4D here is we can combine these ideas. What if we took this shape and volumized it? So now that we know have that shape, we can do the volume mesher volume builder. So into the builder. There we go. Looks pretty blocky. So let's go to the builder and make it 5. And then go into the mesher. There we go. And that makes it much more rounded. It also makes the topology much more. That looks like what I'm looking for. Although let's make it even better by dumping it into the remesh object. The remesh is almost always great, right? Look, see how, again, chaos, order, right? The topology goes in the direction of the object. Cool. We could turn down the density of this a little bit. And so we've got this one here. There's a bunch of nulls, and then we have this extrude object down here. I'm going to try to just control drag this up, like so, and then hit T and scale it down. Right, and so I have 2 of these now. And then I'll hit E and control drag this, I'll grab this one and control drag it over. There we go. And so now all of this again is in the volume object. And so that allows all this to be meshed together. Looks a little wonky down here. Let's turn up the mesh density. And that looks better. If we need more, go back to the volume builder. Maybe this needs to be 3 so that the mesh is a little bit more precise. Just going to make some of these parts a little bit thicker. There, much better. Slide. Excellent example idea, Diana. Right? We got to combine everything we know, right? To maximize this, just moving some objects around, meshing them together. And for the objects that we didn't know how to make. Now, will this extrusion technique work for everything? No, it won't work for absolutely everything, but it will work for a lot of stuff, right? Where things are pretty much one shape, and if you're able to draw the profile and then stretch it out, then you put those different profiles together, you can make you can get a lot of bang for your buck, which is the whole point here. And so now, this is great. We can do the same thing. And so this is the slide. This is the ladder. And again, same thing. What do I have to do to smush it all down into one mesh object? Connect objects. You guys got it in your notes, right? Or you're just writing it down again now for sure. Connect objects, right? Gives me the slide mesh, and then Shift-C, connect the objects. Gives me 2 mesh objects. And then I can group those. Call this slide. And then I can export it. Export selected object as FBX. No cameras, no lights. And export this slide. And back to Unity. Let's bring in the mesh folder the slide. There we go. And since it's 2 objects over here, I can again create separate materials. So let's create just a, oops, not that, not a C# script. Oh my gosh, just delete it. Right click, new material. We'll call this metal. And create a new one. We'll call this red plastic. So I'll take the metal here, let's apply that to the ladder, and probably make it kind of like a gray, and then make it very metallic. There we go, it's super reflective. And then the red plastic I'll put on here, and we'll make it very red. Whoops, wrong one. Red plastic, here we go. Make this very red. And make it not metallic, so to the left. but very smooth, which gives us a nice look there. And so all of the stuff with the scene is in example assets. I'm just going to turn that off. And here I can just make a new plane to start to arrange things in my park. And the green that I used here, that now I should say is just green. Put that on there. Right, so just those, you can see how much we can get done with just those two ideas, right? The volume modeling and the extrusion workflow. So much you can get done with those two ideas. Cool. So we'll make some more things on Wednesday. But right now, why don't you guys see if you can just get the cube. What was the thing I used around the corners? Yes? Which one? What's that? It wasn't bulge.
Bevel?
Yes, bevel, right? You got it in your notes, right? Bevel is rounding corners. Check it out.
That was in my notes, I just couldn't remember that.
Oh, it's not doing anything. Why is it not doing anything?
Because you didn't do it right.
Be more specific.
You have to group them.
Yes, exactly. What's the shortcut for grouping?
Uh,
There you go. Now I get the rounded corners. I can come into bevel and adjust my subdivision, offset. Right, that's what a bevel looks like on the cube. You could do the same thing, for instance, to a cylinder. Right, I would need another bevel deformer. Grab these two and group them together. Right, and I get the same thing now on my cylinder edges. Right, see how this is what makes Cinema 4D great, is like you have this modular workflow. Right, I could do it to literally any shape. Right, some shapes that are already rounded, like the capsule. This doesn't need beveling, right? It's the shapes with the sharp edges that would need beveling. So that was just pressing the middle mouse wheel. Goes back and forth between the 4 views and the one view. Right, you wouldn't bevel the sphere. That doesn't make any sense, really, given how we're using it right now. Right, so go ahead and bevel the cube. You need to connect objects on it. Export it as what type of file? FBX, and then import that into Unity. Cool, and let me share the Miro board, right? So that all of the knowledge that we're mapping here, you can just click on it to access it. And then you can also duplicate it to put your own notes on here. I think Bell's making a thing for that. But let's do that. So you've got 20 minutes. Should be good. See if you can knock it out in less. One cube, rounded corners, into Unity. If you got an existing Unity project on the computer, don't worry about making a new one. Just bring it into that project, because that's the part that's going to take a while. It takes a while for it to make a new project on the school computers. All the school computers are getting upgraded, so should be faster soon, hopefully. All right, it's a race. First, second, third.
Is there a reward, a prize?
The best prize of all, respect.
Is this 1995?
Respect has always
Back
been
in California.
the currency.
Back on Grove Street.
The first step in the race, who can remember their password? Let's see who gets in. Brecken, you have any questions? How did this not charge at all? That's insane.
Oh dear.
What's it say?
Lack of experience program for tablet driver.
Yeah, just okay. Okay, sounds good. I'm going to stop the stream there. Brecken, you give it a shot on your end. You should be able to bevel the cube and bring it into your new Unity project.